I think we'll start now. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening for those tuned in around the world, and welcome back to our online clinical operations strategy meeting 2021. My name's Lewis Michael. I'm the CEO and a founder of Preventer International. And I'd like to say thank you to our co-host sponsor Within 3 with the industry panel entitled A Transformation of Pandemic Proportions, Adopting the Best of Virtual Work for Clinical Teams in 2021 and Beyond. I'd like to introduce our chairperson, Lars Hill, Chief Executive Officer at Within 3, and panelists Magali Taiel, Chief Medical Officer at GenSight Biologics, and Lars Rosendal, Vice President and Head of Global Clinical Operations at Leo Pharma. Lance, over to you.
Great, thank you so much. Welcome, pleasure to be here. I'm very excited to talk about this topic. I think we are all thinking about the pandemic and travel restrictions and what the change has been to our industry over the last couple of years, what the industry will look like over the next couple of years, what that means in practice. And I think hopefully we'll have a great discussion on that today. So by way of agenda, just wanted to further introduce the panel, Lars and Magali, and talk about their companies a little bit. And then go through a brief primer on virtual technologies, the ones that are prevalent today within the industry. And then after that, really get into a panel discussion and talk about the experiences that we've had going through this trying set of circumstances over the last 24 months. So by way of panel, I guess Louis already introduced a bit, but maybe Magali and Lars, maybe if you could just talk a little bit about your firms and what they do so people can get a little bit of a context, that would be great. Maybe Magali, starting with you.
Sure, thank you, Lance. So my name is Magali Taiel. I'm Chief Medical Officer at GenSight Biologics, and GenSight Biologics is a gene therapy company developing gene therapy for inherited retinal diseases. So we are focusing on ophthalmology area, and we have two technology platforms. One is to overcome mitochondrial mutations, and we have a product in late stage development in a rare disease called Leber hereditary optic neuropathy. And we submitted our dossier to EMA in September last year. So really late stage, and we are preparing our commercial activities. And we have another development, another technology platform, which is at early stage development. It's about optogenetics, and we are developing in retinitis pigmentosa at late stage. And we are in first-in-human study right now. So I'm really happy to talk about this key topic, because I think we learned a lot from this pandemic. So there were bad things, but we have also to acknowledge that we can learn from this pandemic a lot, and I'm happy to be part of this panel, and thank you for this invitation.
Thank you. Lars?
Yeah, hey everybody, and thanks Lance for inviting us to talk on this topic. My name is Lars Rosendal, and I'm heading up what's called Global Clinical Operations at Leo Pharma. Leo Pharma is kind of a specialized pharma company focusing primarily on medical dermatology. And it's a pretty seasoned company, basically. It's been around for 112 years, so I wasn't there from the beginning, I will have to say. But we do basically all clinical trials from phase 1 and the first in human and right through to the submission, and of course beyond on phase 4s as well. We're headquartered in Denmark, and that's where I'm based. However, we have a team that is spread throughout the globe, primarily in focus countries that we work in, and of course a number of the functions are centralized in our headquarters in Denmark. And just before the pandemic, we actually launched a team focused on looking at how we can do things more remotely. And it was not with the foresight of a pandemic, but we can perhaps come back to this. I'm pleased to be here with you and be discussing this topic.
Great to have you. Yeah, Leo Pharma, old enough to be around during the last pandemic, the flu in the early 1900s. So 2 pandemics weathered by Leo Pharma and counting, right? Hopefully no more to come. So glad to have everyone here. I thought what I'd do is just go through a brief primer when we talk about virtual engagement technology, so we all kind of know what we're talking about, and then start asking questions of the panelists. And so when we talk about virtual technology, what we mean is technology that allows two-way dialogue. So not necessarily technology that's meant to push content to people for education or marketing purposes, where it's kind of a one-way, but two-way dialogue like we're having right now. And you can really categorize the types of technologies that companies are using into two. One is real-time virtual technologies, like we're having right now, video conferences, webinars, everyone's at the same place on the same technology, speaking the same language, et cetera. And I think everyone has spent a lot of time, certainly over the last couple of years, in front of their video cameras using these types of technologies, and everyone is very, very familiar with them. The other type of technology is technology that is for overtime engagement. So this is more like what online universities often do, where instead of having everyone at the same place at the same time for a video conference, instead we open up a virtual room and people can engage in that room over the few days or a couple of weeks on a variety of activities and set up to really drive outcomes. And that's a little bit about what Within3 does. We have the industry leading platform here, and we work with all 20 of the top 20 pharmaceutical companies, and many mid-sized biotech, pharma, med device, med tech, diagnostic, et cetera. And just to give you a little bit of a sense of what the main capabilities of those technologies are, they really allow, again, for people to log in and have discussion with each other over time, posting threads, kind of like you might see on social media, reviewing materials, answering questions, tagging one another. These tools tend to have very robust interaction around documents. So whether you're authoring things like protocols or amendments, whether you're getting feedback on materials, it really allows people to talk directly within documents with a full set of features to do that and really support detailed outcomes. Medical language or language translation. These tools typically allow you to remove language as a barrier by translating up to 100 different languages in real time. Also medical dictation, so people can kind of dictate things directly into these platforms versus having to type with full medical terminology. And everything out of these tools ends up being kind of a structured output. Meaning that it's tabulated, it's consolidated, so the output's easier to work with than, say, a Zoom transcript or something like that, which is a little more unstructured. So there's a lot of capabilities in these tools. These are some of the main ones. And they fit in different spots. And so what you find is for, if your goal is to have a lot of two-way interaction, video conferences work great if there's not a lot of people, because not everyone can talk at the same time. When you start getting more than 4 people, video conferencing gets tough. It turns more to a presentation like we're having now, where there's a few of us talking and most people listening. And then the online discussion platforms, the overtime meetings, are really great when you have, say, 5 people or more, and you want kind of detailed back and forth interaction. You want to manage the logistics of all of that. And so organizations have been using kind of these technologies back and forth in mixture to accomplish different things. Especially the online discussion platforms on the right are newer to the industry, but are gaining significant traction. Within our company, implementations on online discussion platforms have doubled every 6 months since 2017. And then you can imagine when the travel restrictions happened, the volume of use of the platforms went even higher. And I think when we, getting into the panel, these technologies need to be used and applied across everything really that happens within clinical and R&D. There is a lot of communication needed, as you all know, to execute business. It's challenging, and mixing when to have live meetings when travel permitted versus some of these virtual tools and maybe some other tools that are coming down the pike is a question mark. and it involves compliance, and it involves thinking about the efficacy of the tools. It involves satisfaction of investigators and coordinators and patients. There's a lot of stakeholders involved here. And so what I'd love to get into now is really talk to the panel about navigating some of those challenges, where they've maybe used virtual technologies, and what the results that they've seen and how they think about it going forward. Okay, so let's start off maybe with Lars. I'll start with you. How did the travel restrictions and maybe how sudden the travel restrictions arrived? How did that impact your business, and what were some of the biggest challenges that you've seen over the past 18 months or so?
Yeah, Lance, I would probably divide it into two. I mean, at the time when we were hit with the first round of the pandemic, we actually had a phase 3 program running at the back end of it. However, as you all know, when you have a phase 3 program, it's all about speed to getting the BLA or your NDA in, depending on what kind of molecule you have. And that was the same for us. And we're therefore really challenged on figuring out how can we keep our business running with a number of the issues that most, I think, companies were struggling with: sites closing down, site staff being focused on other elements within their hospitals, and then of course our staff not necessarily being able to go out to the sites and engage with them. So I'd say that's probably one of the major initial challenges that we have or had. And perhaps, I mean, some of the things that we did to manage that is, of course, making sure that, and I think this is not unique to us at all, I think all face this. I mean, how do you keep patients going in your trials? Well, you make sure that the drug can come to them. I think most companies manage to actually to do that. That was also one of the early things that we did. We worked on how can we look at the data remotely with our collaborators. We look at how can we be engaging with site staff when we can't visit them. I think some of the technology that your company is providing have some interesting elements that supports that. And then, of course, first and foremost for us, we looked at how can we make sure that we can still continue to look out for the patients participating in our trials. So that means remote safety. And we also worked on a solution on remote efficacy assessment. That was a really interesting exercise that we ended up not using because actually the sites managed to get the patients in for those critical last visits. However, it was a really, really interesting exercise to figure out what would that take and how would we interact with authorities to get, let's say, their acceptance of doing that.
Magali, how about you? How did the sudden onset of travel restrictions impact your business?
So I think there are two aspects. Firstly, how we work together changed a lot within the company. Before, everyone was going, to the office. It just in France, people used to do that a lot, comparing to the US or comparing to Nordic countries probably as well. So it really changed our way to work. At the beginning, it was really, something very new, but now it seems very natural. And I think we won't get back to where we were before. People will tend to go on working from home from time to time because it saves a lot of time and a lot of energy as well. And probably you save time and then you work better. And secondly, regarding clinical trials, I think there have been many impacts that probably are different according to the disease, according to the stage of a trial, or according also to the design of the trial and so on. And we can get into details, but definitely, I think if I had to write a protocol right now, I would think differently today comparing to 2 years ago.
And do you think, building on that, do you think a couple of years ago, it was just because you never really had the occasion to try to think differently, or you didn't need to, or do you think it was really a forcing mechanism from the travel restrictions to kind of force you into a different space than maybe you would have gotten there eventually, but taken a bit longer?
Yes, I think before it was, for example, just give you a practical examples about number of visits or number of exams per visit. I think before we were saying, yes, we need to limit the burden of patients, and we were very conscious of that. But it was, we were not at the extreme position where we lived issues in our trials because we put too many visits, because patients could not travel and so on. We faced these issues. So right now we are really in a different, I would say, mindset. And for example, for chronic disease, we faced a lack of recruitment because people could wait to get treatment and to get into a clinical trial. Or for other diseases, we faced that maybe we put too many visits and people could not travel. So it was really an issue for patients, for the trial, for the quality of the data and so on. And because we faced these issues in real life, I think now it's a priority to build our clinical trials in another way. So it's a good learning at the end of the day.
And Magali and Lance, perhaps if I can just build on that, because I think it's interesting, the question that you ask. And if I look back at our industry and take a little bit of a cynical or critical look at it, I think it's extremely conservative. I mean, we basically hardly changed our behavior over the last 20 to 30 years. Whenever we did, it was because we were pushed one way or another. And I think that COVID and what that did to us and did to regulators was really a huge experiment and a huge accelerator for enabling but also pushing us to act and think differently. And it's of course natural that we are very conservative because there's a lot of stake. It's huge investments that we do in the clinical space, and you don't want to basically mess it up. However, I think we have gotten the opportunity to explore new ways of working with the pandemic that will mean that probably we'll never go back to being really the same. Some things probably will go back, but not fully.
What about, so you mentioned patients, what about investigators and some of the professional stakeholders and in the process that now had to engage with your companies remotely as well? What sort of reaction, feedback, or discussions did you have with them to manage that side of things?
Well, very good experience from investigators. I would like to say that and stress on that because we could put in place, some kind of virtual visits, even if it's not, some complete visits you would dream to have. Still, it was very important for safety of the patients. And spontaneously, the investigators went to this direction, and we had a very good connections with them. And it was for safety purposes and for patient safety. And the regulators as well helped a lot because they provided guidelines very early during the process. And I think the guidelines were really coherent. So at the end of the day, people worked together to make sure we could cover the patient safety and we could find solution. And just a quick example I would like to share with you, because I work in a rare disease area. Patients traveled a lot for their visits previously. And because of the COVID, we could put in place some satellite centers. And with the help of the principal investigators, we could connect with satellite centers who really accepted, to take over for many exams, many visits. And it was a really good experience because we felt a real support from investigators, from regulators in local areas to find solutions for the patients. So positive experience in general.
Yeah, it's interesting. One of the, building on that, and Lars, coming back to something you had mentioned, one of the barriers oftentimes to adopting new technology is compliance and regulation, and the fear that if we adopt something new, how will it work in that environment? And I think the speed at which regulators were able to also adapt was really quite remarkable, given previous history and the pace of change. It forced everyone across the ecosystem to really rethink what they do out of necessity. So let's talk about the future. So obviously, hopefully one day travel restrictions around the world will be gone, and we'll be back to life as normal, quote unquote, whatever normal looks like. Are we going back to 2019 with processes? Do you think we'll slowly maybe head back to 2019 over time? Or do you think that we've fundamentally changed how we use these virtual technologies to execute what we do? Maybe Magali, maybe starting with you.
Yeah, I think there will be a before COVID and after COVID for sure. I think we'll change the way to work. We'll think twice when we have to travel. Is it worth traveling? Can we do it another way? Is it worth traveling for one day just to meet two people? For sure, this is really important. And for as well, I think for clinical activities, again, if I have to write a protocol right now, to be honest, I will look at each visit and ask to myself, do I need this visit? Is it worth doing it? Does it make sense? There is this investigator center. It's very far from the patient. Is there another investigator center that could be used? Have we explored all the possibilities? And I think we can make our trials, maybe more attractive and maybe a better experience for the patients, because we won't have to travel too much, and at the end of the day, with the same quality of the data and maybe a better experience for the patient. So I think it's gonna change the way we think, with the way we work, with the way we are conducting clinical trials.
Lars, how about you? What do you think the future holds?
First and foremost, I would agree a lot with Magali. I think that the pandemic has pushed us to think about exactly what we do. If I have a look at how we designed protocols in the past, sometimes they're really tough to follow. If I made myself a patient, I probably would have had a hard time participating in that trial. And that inevitably will have to have the effect that it reduces the patient population. That is really not what we want in clinical trials. However, on the flip side of that is the cohesiveness of the patients that we want to include. And that's been for many, many years the dilemma and the discussion between different development functions. Now, what I see is that we have different conversations today is really, as Magali says, do we need this visit, or could this visit actually be captured remotely? Could we not make the patient need to go to the site? Could the site, quote unquote, come to the patient, or do something just remotely? There's a lot of things that has happened in that field, and I do think that we will see much more from that, remote visits, complete remote trials, potentially at some point. So yeah, I think a lot has changed. And practically from our own end, when we've started up trials recently, from the very starting point or small things, I mean, investigator meetings, we used to do them face-to-face because we really like to get in, get close with our peers and our investigators to have the dialogue. Now we've turned them upside down and basically only run them virtual. And they still get really good rating. However, when we also ask them, what would you prefer if we could go back? Still, 2 out of 3 says, can we meet again? So let's see what the future holds. Probably sometimes you will do it on some of the important meetings face to face, but most of them, in my opinion, will probably still stay virtual.
It's interesting. I don't know if you both agree with this, but I remember, before the travel restrictions hit, if you just wanted to do something like this, like a video conference, when you could have done a live meeting. It was almost like you were feeling like you were being cheap, or you weren't putting your effort in, or people were kind of like, oh, this must not have been that important, because like it felt like doing business sometimes only via video conference wasn't to the same level of commitment and professionalism versus meeting in person. And I think that's changed because we've been doing this for so long. Do you all agree with that? Is there a different feeling, in doing virtual work now as it being accepted versus it being a little bit awkward?
Yeah, I think there is something that can also pop up, as you said. It's kind of hybrid meetings. And you can see that from time to time for congresses and so on. People who are really far away, or there are travel restrictions, or they cannot, just travel. They can make their presentation in a virtual way, and there are others who are on site. And maybe we'll get into that as well, a kind of flexibility for everyone, with the same quality in terms of exchanges and quality of the presentations.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think the term hybrid meeting is really out in the industry quite a bit now, and that's exactly what that is the idea that even if I'm going to have a live meeting, maybe prior to the live meeting, I have some virtual engagement, so that if the live meeting is really expensive, it needs to be really effective. I don't want to waste part of the live meeting in the beginning doing agenda and introductory materials and things like that. And then oftentimes after a live meeting, it's difficult. There are things that didn't have time to get to, things for follow-up, and you can use virtual to kind of bookend live meetings. And medical congresses certainly have been innovating with this hybrid approach. Can you imagine a day, Lars, where it's always assumed that if you're going to have some sort of live event, there's a virtual component to it as well?
Yeah, I think that's a good question, Lance, and I do think that we will see more of that, and I do think that it will become more effective. And if I take kind of our team as an example, we used to, because I'm based in our headquarters, we used to be many people in the room, and then the people that were not there were globally. They were dialing in and sometimes had a really hard time in actually following the discussion because people had then side conversations in the room. Now, the pandemic meant that we were all away from each other, and probably even improved the quality of our interaction because we all got on the same foot and on the same kind of terms. So I think some of the things have really improved our interaction and really equalized. It doesn't matter if you participate from Asia or US or from Denmark or wherever, you're all on the same foot, as long as you had good Wi-Fi.
Right, exactly. Right. And building on that, I think we've talked a bit about this already, but from a patient point of view, it would seem to me that this virtual ability to potentially participate in studies democratizes patient populations a bit more, offers more opportunity, which is great for everyone involved, everyone in that thought process. How do you think about that, Lars? Do you think eventually you'll look back and say this actually improved our ability to execute studies?
Yeah, as any company, we would be chasing, let's say, the speed at which we could set up and execute our clinical trials. And actually, as I mentioned in the beginning, just before the pandemic, roughly 4 months before, we established a team that we call Revolutionize Clinical Trials. But there was all about figuring out, can we do things in a new way? And we met a lot of internal resistance and can't do this. But really, the pandemic completely changed that because suddenly everybody could see that, hey, we're faced with a situation where we can't do it in the way we used to. So actually, we are planning our first hybrid trial, and actually also a fully virtual trial where the patient never gets in to meet a physician. That is, of course, pushing the boundaries a lot, and it means a ton of discussion with regulators and health authorities. But we see a really high interest from them in actually interacting with us and trying to figure this out because they can see it's probably also going to come their way. And our hope is, of course, that will enable more patients, more geographically spread, to participate, and therefore a a quicker execution. However, since we haven't gone through it fully yet, I'll still, let's say, the result is still outstanding. But I'm very hopeful that some of this new stuff will help us engage more effectively with patients. Yeah,
that's exciting. Magali, I think we have a minute or two left. Any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think if we can, aim to reduce the visit by half, and we get, we reduce them by 30% and 20%, and we add virtual visits or things like that for the patients, I think it would be a great achievement, and the patients will be more than happy to avoid them, excessive travels during the trials. So, yeah, I think we're going to change the way we are designing clinical trials for sure.
All right. Well, I think we're about out of time. Thank you very much. That was really interesting discussion. It seems like there's a lot of change that's occurred, and that change is going to carry forward. And it also seems that both your companies are not just looking at what you've done, but think about how to innovate going forward and how to rethink the future. And I think that's going to be great for patients, great for companies, great for getting therapies to market. So thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I'll turn it back to Preventa.
Thank you, Lance. Thank you, Magali. And thank you, Lars. Really appreciate it and look forward to the rest of the day. Take care for everyone. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.